So I might just talk for a few moments. I think at the end of a practice, it's very helpful to just ask, how did that go? How was it? And then when you reflect on it, you can kind of quantify to some degree, was it as deep as your previous sitting, your previous session? Was it deeper? Was it deeper in a different way? And it just brings about a type of questioning which doesn't really fit our normal criteria for answering or finding answers for questions. We can try and put it into words and say, well, this and that and this and that. But there's a subtleness to the experience that we've just had that when we ask ourselves the question, using our words, how did that go? How was it? It can just, we can fail, if we're going to say it like that. We kind of fail in being able to articulate exactly how to measure it, to articulate exactly how profound or not profound it was. The experience doesn't lend itself well to being put into words. An expression that comes to mind is when people ask you, "Where's your head at?" You know, this idea of where are you at? Where is your head at in relation to something? And in our meditation practices, where's your head at? When you finish your practice, where's your head at? Because where your head is now, it's quite likely to be very different to where your head was when you first sat down to practice. And then you're trying to articulate or put into words some sense of rationale or reasoning for how you have moved from one state into another state. And if the state that you're experiencing now isn't as profound or as deep as it was in your previous sitting, how do you rationalize that? What is it that you say to yourself to say, well, today's session, today's sitting, today's practice wasn't as good as yesterday's practice. I didn't manage to go as deep as I did yesterday. Why? Why didn't you? What is it that got in the way? And I suppose this is what meditation practice is all about. The formal practice, the taking of time to formally dedicate yourself to internalizing your attention and exploring your relationships to your own mental processes. That's what meditation is about. And then when we talk about what is it that prevents us from being able to have an experience like we had previous, that previous experience was so profound. You seem to have such insight, such clarity of awareness. Why didn't that happen again today? What was it that prevented that? What was it that got in the way of that? But the whole formal practice of meditation is one which lends itself to our being able to understand what it is that gets in the way. And it, as has been mentioned, it doesn't lend itself very well to being able for us to be able to articulate it and put it into words and rationalize it and reason it. So if we kept a chart, a lovely metric table of our meditation practice and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and we were write down, okay, well, if I was going to put it into percentages, how deep did I go? It's highly subjective. I mean, it's highly related to your own relationship to yourself on that given day, on a physical level, an emotional level, and a mental level. So your determining of how profound you went is based on the variables of what you're experiencing on that current occasion. And you write it down, you put it down your chart, you give yourself a lovely 70 on a Monday. And then Tuesday, it's the second day in the week. Maybe there's a little bit more stress at work and different things going on, and it's not Monday anymore, but it's not the middle of the week either, and it's not the end of the week. So there's a different perspective on things, and maybe how you measure it, what percentage you give it. Maybe you don't give it 70. Maybe it's dropped down now to 65. But who is it that actually regulates that? What is it that is able to create a kind of a, a, a criteria that allows you to put a measurement on it that's exact? And the truth is that it's up to you. It's all up to you. And regardless of who you listen to or what books you read or what great teachers you have the good fortune of spending time with or whatever it is, fundamentally, when it comes down to your evaluating your own experience, the only one that can do so is you. So, what's our meditation practice about? It's about giving ourselves a chance to just do that exploration of understanding how we relate to our own internal processes, which is a very direct, entangled experience. Um, and as a result, makes it extremely difficult for us to measure objectively. Yoga, in the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, the definition of yoga is yoga chitta vritti nirodha. And some of you will be familiar with that term, but it's the essence of yoga practice, which in turn is the essence of our meditation practice. Our chitta, our field of conscious expression, that's our physical nature, that's our emotional nature, that's our mental nature. It's the whole canvas where we experience life, where it's all unfolding for us. And it's unfolding within the domain of the body, physical, emotional, or energetic, and mental. That's the chitta, the field of conscious expression. And then there's movements taking place in that, those vritti, which are the energy effect, the potency, the current, the transient turbulence which is taking place, which we experience again physically within our bodies, emotionally, energetically, within the domain of our existence in relationship to the body, and also in terms of what's going on in our minds. So we have all this taking place, these transient movements which are taking place, the vritti. And then if we're going to experience yoga, if we're going to experience a state of what we can call oneness, but won't go into too long into defining what yoga can be understood to be, because it's that experience of when all of those movements, all of those fluctuations, all of those transient, changing patterns of effect or potency or energy which are taking place within this whole domain of how we experience life, when all of those are neutralized is the word that's often used. Sometimes it's translated to as cease, when they stop, when they cease, when they no longer occur. Nirodha. That's when we experience yoga. So this word nirodha, translating to mean stop or cease or neutralize or remove, or there's many different ways that we can talk about it. But it's important for us to kind of have a sense of what it is that's going on. Because when we sit to meditate, as you'll know, when you first start to meditate, you had a certain relationship to this field of conscious expression, this domain from which you express and engage in life, physically, emotionally, and mentally. There was certain turbulence within that system, which you were conscious of to a certain degree, but there's a lot of it that you're not conscious of. It's outside of your consciousness. It's unconscious to you, but it's taking place nonetheless. And when you sit to meditate, because of the very nature of meditation, you're internalizing your attention, you're removing yourself from anything else that might distract you from having an awareness of what's taking place within this mind body system. And so you come head to head with it, face to face with it, and you start to experience it directly. Those movements start to become more obvious. And so you work with them. And that's what our formal meditation practices is allowing us to do, is to become aware of them so that we can work with them, work through them, so that they become neutralized in the sense that we're able to transcend the more gross variants of these and move into experiencing the more subtle, dreamlike variants of these to the point of experiencing the extremely subtle. So that process is a process of Naroda. If we should think of it in our practice, what we're actually doing then, it's not a case of us having a laser gun of some kind where we're looking for where these movements are taking place and then zapping them, neutralizing them, getting them out of the way, where we've internalized our attention and now it's kind of like, okay, I've put a curtain over the external world and now I'm looking at the internal world. Where are my enemies here that I'm going to zap and neutralize so that I can experience yoga? So no zapping can take place. The movements are taking place, but if we're out to look for them, then that is the opposite of what we're trying to do in our meditation practice. We're not out to hunt them down. Hunting them down is the very thing that causes us to get entangled with them in the first place. In fact, the opposite takes place where they are presenting themselves to us, quite literally showing themselves up, coming out from behind the trees, from under the woodwork, presenting themselves to us. So the Narodaha doesn't work like a laser gun where we're zapping them, trying to neutralize them, remove them. We're trying to do the opposite. So these movements we refer to as vritti. We can use an object of focus. An object of focus that we use that we call meditation techniques. We can use these as a way of installing a specific kind of vritti. So we are putting in place a vritti which we have determined as being the one which is going to prevent us from getting caught up in any of the other vritti. But, as you know from your experience, the other vritti are just so keen to be seen, so keen to be given attention, that our mantra or our breathing technique or whatever it is that we use to focus our attention on, body scanning or whatever it might be, that is the vritti that we've put in place to be the core object of focus, the most dominant vritti, so that we can disregard all the other vritti. But the other vritti pop their little heads and come out of the woodwork, and we find ourselves being distracted. And again, if we go back to our analogy of the laser gun, which is trying to neutralize all these things, neutralize these movements, there's no neutralizing that can take place. Because once we start to focus in on one of them, thinking that, oh, if I focus in on this, I'll get rid of it, it won't work. It'll have a counter effect. Because the focusing in on it, then that one vritti that's popped its head and we say, okay, I'm going to zap you. As soon as you focus in on it, it'll say, oh, look, guys, he's paying attention to us. Come on out. And more will come. That one vritti that's risen up is almost like the leader. And once we give it some kind of attention to it, that we're going to try and overcome it purposefully, we're going to use our intention to get rid of it. Then as soon as we do that, then it'll say, well, I'm not on my own. There's more here. And we'll see the sudden surge and upsurge of all these other vritti. So we use one single vritti, we install it as being the place where we're going to put our attention. But it's not by way of it being a tool for zapping like a laser gun. In fact, the neutralizing takes place without any purposefulness, without any effort. That the ridding or the cessation or the overcoming of the effect, the potency of the different movements taking place within the domain of our conscious expression. There, that occurs as a consequence of, of our practice, as opposed to be something which we are actively doing. So to clarify that, Nirodha is an effect. It's an effect which occurs as a consequence. It's not something that we can actively do, that we can purposefully bring about. We can facilitate it. But if we go out with our laser gun and try and zap everything that's getting in the way, so when we sit down to meditate, it's kind of this very conscious, deliberate, trying to just get rid of anything that comes up. There's one, no, get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that. That in itself can perpetuate what we are experiencing. Now, just to clarify, that if we have another vritti that we've installed, we'll say mantra, we put that in there. So if we're focusing on our mantra, then that is the vritti that we are giving our attention to. So there is some type of deliberation in that. There's some type of purposefulness. And then when the other vritti try to get our attention, we're keeping our focus on that one vritti that we've installed, the mantra. But when we're experiencing meditation beyond the use of an object of focus, so when we're trying to move into a state of meditation without support, so this would be experiencing meditation where we are opening ourselves up to neutralizing all vritti. So we're not installing a vritti, we're not using mantra anymore, we're not using body scan, we're just experiencing being. To get to that, we have to accept that there's nothing for us to purposefully focus on. There's nothing for us to deliberately attach our attention onto. There's nothing there. Because as soon as we do that, we're engaging with the vritti. So we use our object of focus, our mantra, to get us to a point where we are less likely to be just wandering around shooting our laser gun at the different vrittis that are popping their heads. Instead, we're using our laser alert attentiveness to focus in on the mantra, disregarding everything else that's going on. But then there comes a point when we have to let go of the mantra too, because the mantra in its own right is a vritti. And we want to exercise our capacity to just be able to experience existing, being without any support. We want to practice doing that. We should give ourselves time in our meditation practice to doing that. Because the techniques that we're using, even mantra or whatever it might be, they are a means to that end. So we want to practice that end of just abiding, experiencing our existence without needing any support to identify ourselves with. And so what will happen is that we'll move into a space where now the laser gun has nothing to direct itself to. Our attention has nothing specific to latch onto. It has nothing. And it's there. But the vritti may still, are quite likely to be still presenting themselves in different forms, in different ways. And what do we do when that occurs? We can't start directing our attention to them. The laser gun isn't going to work. That's not the way Naroda works. We've moved into a space where now we can understand that tranquility, that's peace, that calm, that's an effect which has been brought about as a consequence of our, first of all, using the mantra to just have our laser focused in on one vritti, one specific thing. And that has helped us to disregard all the other vritti. But then at that point, we disregard the mantra. And now we've got this open space, but we have nowhere to direct this attention, nowhere specific to direct our attention. But there's going to be some movement which are taking place. So what do we do when these movements are taking place? What happens? Where do we direct our focus? What's the answer? There's nowhere for us to direct our focus. There's nowhere specific for us to direct our focus. But that's not to say that there won't be movements. That's not to say that there won't be some kind of residual effect, some very subtle thought processes. But our being able to sustain the experience of just being means that we're not directing our focus onto any of these movements. So where do we direct it? Where does it go? We have nothing, nothing to latch onto, nothing to give our attention to. But yet, the residual effect hasn't been completely neutralized. There's still a type of movement, there's still a type of current which is still working itself out within our mind body system. So, what can we do? And I'm slow to give the answer, you might have seen. Because giving the answer requires our moving into an understanding that it's not about consciousness so much as it's about awareness. No, you might be inclined to consider the two to be the same, which is understandable, but I'm differentiating them because when we think of consciousness, we think of consciousness as thinking beings. We are thinking beings who are consciously able to rationalize and reason. I began this little talk by talking about how we're being able to measure and quantify how well we did in our practice, which is a task which is tricky because it's hard to articulate exactly what we've just been experiencing. And so if we take that into consideration, just how tricky it is for us to measure up, quantify, put into words the difference between our meditation practice today and yesterday and the day before and 1 week ago and 2 months ago, just how tricky that is. It's tricky because our conscious, rational thinking processes are not so subtle to be able to measure them in a way which is where we can translate them into words which can be communicated at this very gross level. It doesn't work like that. So when we think of our consciousness, we are conscious beings. That's true, but consciousness is also in direct proportion to unconsciousness, the stuff that we don't know about. And there's a kind of a juxtapositioning, a kind of a relationship between those two, what's conscious and what's not conscious. But when we think of being conscious beings, it gives us this stage on which we can just stand ourselves and position ourselves as an authority saying, I can work this out. I can figure it out. I'm in charge. I'm in control. But then there's all the stuff that's unconscious. Who's in control of that? And fundamentally, all there is, those two domains, that dual relationship between what's conscious and unconscious, that exists fundamentally in awareness. What we have is awareness. We are aware of those two functioning processes taking place. And so when we arrive at a point in our meditation practice when there's nothing to latch onto, yet there can still be movements. And some of these movements might come from a more conscious level of thinking, and some of them might come from a more unconscious level of thinking. But nonetheless, they're both giving way to a movement that causes a ripple effect within the mental or in the mind. But what is there that's really going to allow us to work through them, to remove the effects, to neutralize the effects, to let it burn itself out? What's there to allow that? And the thing that's there to allow that is awareness. Just awareness. Now that's as an object, if you're going to consider it an object of focus, but we can't consider it an object of focus because awareness is the very essence from which all of it has arisen. So as an object, there's nothing there to represent it. There's nothing there for it to be known except the experience of it. So we experience the awareness. And then that awareness is the very thing that we are using as our object of focus. So if somebody says to you, what's your object of focus? My object of focus is awareness. But how do you stay aware of awareness? And that's fundamentally the practice. That's where we're moving ourselves to be. Because considering our practice to be one where we are knowing thoughts to be rising up, and for us to be at some level in charge of that, we're in charge of those thoughts as some kind of gamekeeper or some kind of CEO managing the whole thing. Well, these thoughts can come up and those don't come up. And we know through our experience of meditation, it's far more chaotic than that. The processes which are allowing us to give way to that energetic potency which is within this field of conscious expression. The processes which are allowing that to become condensed in as thoughts or as emotions or whatever it might be, the processes which are taking place are taking place. And some of them enter into our field of conscious thinking where we can rationally understand them or less rationally understand them. But some of them, they're just beyond that. And we experience these when we're in bed at night, sleeping and dreaming. And we experience them when we go deep in our meditation practice. There can be these murmurations, these occurrences taking place that if we were to try and articulate them, it would be extremely difficult. But there's stuff going on. But that stuff, it can be intimidating because it's not there in our conscious cognitive thinking realm. It's in a realm which is far more subtle than that. And so it can be, in some ways, for some people, a type of phenomena which is very alluring and ultimately distracting. Voices, sounds, people speaking to them, ghostly figures, spirits, all this. But then beyond all of that interplay, all of that energy, all of that expression, there is that one thing which is just paying attention, and that's awareness. So awareness is the essence of it all. It's what's it's the canvas. It's the unchanging basis, and it's forever present. I talk about consciousness as being distinct from awareness because we associate consciousness with thinking quite a lot. That's our tendency. Awareness is not thinking. But what awareness allows us to do as we become more skilled at attuning ourselves to it and experiencing it, it allows us to neutralize the potency of what's taking place consciously or unconsciously. It allows it to, for the effect of those rippling currents to work themselves out, to be dissolved of any energetic effect. But how that takes place isn't something that we can quantify, put down in a lovely metric system of what we've done. All of that stuff is happening at a conscious level in our conscious thinking processes. Awareness is far more subtle than that. It penetrates to the core, but it's not for us to be able to put it into our rational thinking processes and make sense of it. Make sense of it. In fact, a lot of it could, if we tried to put it into words, it'll just be nonsensical. And we see this when people are trying to talk and explain about what's experienced, what is yoga, what do we experience when we go into this state. The challenge of explaining what a transcendental experience is it's enough to get anyone tongue-tied. So our practice, our formal meditation practice, is one where we're exploring the mechanics of the mind, but now with the understanding that the mind, what's going on there, can be rational and made sense of at a conscious level, and there's a lot which just can't. But the thing that allows us to work through it, neutralize it, is awareness. And as we work through it, our relationship to that awareness will become more aligned. We will actually experience ourselves as just being that, as being the awareness.